Okay. We got Cliff and Edie.
Good evening.
Good evening. I can't hear you guys yet, but
No? Can you hear?
asked to unmute. Okay, do we got you?
How about now? Do you hear us now?
Got you now.
Okay.
Peirce, do we got you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right, good to go. Peirce, hey, this time we're a timely group, and others are just on vacation, and so the first few minutes, folks are going to kind of get signed in and join a little late, but just here comes you. Hey, Steve, how are you? Good evening.
Very good. Very good.
I've got to stay close to the computer here. It asked me to manually enter those that are trying to enter the room. All right. Okay. Enter a few more here. Hey, so Peirce, where are we catching you at tonight?
I'm in Michigan.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Where
we
on the
settled
hand?
in on the hand. We're somewhere north of Detroit.
Okay. Good. I know Detroit and sister in Cadillac, Traverse City area. And
Oh, I was just in Cadillac last week.
oh, good.
So,
It's a nice little place.
yeah, it's a fun town.
Little lake there. And okay, so we got a few joining, and I'm going to sit in my seat, but again, it kind of gives me a manual admit for when they're trying to come in, so I'll keep getting up, but I want to introduce everyone tonight to Peirce. We're not going to use any last names because of sensitivity. I see Heather's daughter. And sensitivity as in the nation he works at. So we are going to wait for a few more to come in, and I'll lay some of the sensitivity rules down because of where they work. Certain terms that we use, such as the M term for overseas laborers, we won't use tonight, only because this later goes on our social media. And here we go. Hi, Mabel. Okay, so we got Mabel joining us. How you doing tonight, Heather? I think you're on.
I'm pretty good.
Good.
Hanging in there.
How are the girls doing?
Oh, they're good.
Heather?
Challenging.
Okay. So I assume Peirce will have a few kind of coming and or, needing to leave. Generally, we aim for about 45 minutes, but I'm going to grab my seat and we'll go from there. So you're in Michigan tonight, right?
Yes, sir.
Good. So you're home in the States. We're going to leave a lot of the exactly how Peirce tells us where and what kind of work he does to him. Normally, I kind of give a little introduction, but we don't always have, our workers, right? We don't have our workers in sensitive areas always with us. So with that said, I want to introduce you to those that you see. I'll call them out as I see them, Peirce, on my screen. It may not be the same exact order, but if you'll just say hello. We've got Cliff.
Hi, Peirce.
E.
Hi, Peirce.
Hello.
We've got Kipper. Myself, Michael. We've got Brother Steve.
That's me.
We've got Heather. And then we've got Mabel. Okay, and then you
Nice to meet you all.
guys, you probably heard, we've got Peirce. And Peirce, your wife's name?
Megan.
Megan, okay. And where is home originally for you, Peirce?
So I actually grew up in Georgia, and when I was 20 years old, I moved to Michigan, and that's where I met my wife.
Okay.
And then we went out 3 months after we got married. We signed up to work overseas. And so we've been living overseas for a little over 10 years now.
Okay. And your wife is born and raised Michigan?
Born and raised. Yeah, I grew up at a AG church here in town where I met her. And yeah, so yeah. And then we've got 2 little boys, a 5-year-old named Elliot. And then our younger son, he just turned 4 and his name is Summit.
Okay, great. And my wife too was raised, at least for the early years, in Upper Michigan and
Okay.
Iron Mountain.
Okay.
And I think that's up there. That's also snowmobile country and
Yep.
way up there in the UP for Michigan talkers. And so we're excited to have you. Part of our early part where we just kind of describe where this kicked off. This is sort of recent and new for us. We love missions at Calvary. We love missionaries. And we didn't want any missionaries really to be inhibited from connecting with different. Another one coming in. Diane, how are you? I think you're on mute or it's disconnecting, so let me make sure. All right. Diane, you probably can hear us. It's just taking a minute to connect to your audio, especially if it's the first time you've been doing this. I don't know if it is.
Diane Meyer, she's been on before.
Okay. Peirce, one sec. I'm going to fiddle with.
Yeah, no worries.
Maybe she was different.
Okay.
Well, Fly's in here tonight.
Yeah.
Well, if that's all we have to worry about, then.
Diane, I think we have you now, no? Can we hear you? No. On a lot of our screens, whether it's a tablet, phone, or computer, you can or can't hear us. No?
There's usually some kind of icon there.
There is an icon on a lot of our devices under our name. That, Larry, you got it?
You'll think it's on and it's actually
Okay,
not,
I think we
so-
got you now. Sound check with Diane, sound check with Larry.
I'm here if you can hear me.
I'm here.
Okay, got you
Oh,
both
okay.
now. Hey, I'll do a mini reintroduction. Tonight we're with Peirce. Before we go any further, just because you two are just joining on, there's certain terms that we're not going to use, especially the M term. We're going to refer to Peirce as an overseas worker because of the privacy and sensitivity issue, particularly with once this goes on our social media sites. So if it were just a call, it's a whole nother thing. He also won't be saying exactly which country, but describing. So Peirce, this is Diane, and then Brother Larry joined us as well, and his wife usually is sitting on the next couch over.
Well, when she gets here, the camera will be on her, but because I'm sure you don't want to look at all this.
So this is
I don't know.
Peirce. Hey,
That's a pretty amazing mustache he's got. I'm kind of jealous. So
Peirce, we were just in the middle of telling you, so we love missionaries, we love missions, and we just want to make sure that, this has been a tough season for you guys. Can you kind of testify that as that community? I think I dropped the word too, sorry.
yeah, no, you're fine. Yeah, it's been interesting. So we actually came back in January to start our regular year fundraising, and we had every Sunday booked up until November.
Okay.
And then literally 5 weeks into it, our state shut down right of the 1st of March. And yeah, it's an interesting season for sure. I think the unfortunate part is we've seen a lot of people step away during this season, a little bit higher than normal. I mean, there's been 20 other workers just in the last 2 months that have stepped away, just for a variety of reasons. But I think it's just a really difficult season right now. So I think that's the part that hurts. Is because, we always want more workers on this side of the world, like doing this, and stretches like this. Yeah, they just really seem, there's an effect on the total number of our workers.
And not only that, but your workers' ability to get into house.
Yeah.
You know, so it's different in that sense because normally it's easy to kind of set some plans and visit different houses and
Yeah.
your story. But a lot of churches I dropped it, but it's
You're good. I
frustrating for
promise.
me. We're so used to this lingo. So, but a lot of them recently, you know, have been closed or switched to live.
Yeah.
It's been difficult. So, which is the reason why we opened up Zoom to be able to connect with our workers and let them share and us still be encouraged. So, you just kind of share first anything you want to share about your family.
Yeah, I'll kind of share just a little bit about us, like kind of how we came into this calling and stuff. It was funny because about 6 months ago, I was sitting with a group of pastors, and one of them asked me a question, and he goes, "So why are you a missionary?" And I kind of just paused for a second, not because I didn't have like this theological answer I could have given him, but I literally looked at him, and my response was, "Why wouldn't I be a missionary? Like it's the only thing I've ever known, and it's like the only thing that's ever made sense in my entire life." And it's funny because I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I actually grew up in a trailer park in a white trash poor community, in a small town called Donville, Georgia. And my parents divorced when I was 3 years old. Like my dad lived 2 miles down the road from us growing up, and I would go years without seeing him. Even to this day, I've seen him once in the last 15 years. He's never even met my kids. And I don't even remember a time in my life where my dad even said that he loved me. And then my mom, she remarried 5 men before I graduated high school. And each one of those was just a cycle of addiction, abuse. There was physical abuse where child protective services were called because we had bruises. My sisters were sexually abused for years by one of my stepdads, and my mom knew about it and never stopped it. And it was just this complete chaotic and just dysfunctional environment. But I always say that my mom did one thing right. In that small little town, there was a Baptist church. And every Sunday morning and every Wednesday night, they would send the school bus through the neighborhood, and they would pick all of us kids up from the trailer park. And my mom would literally force me to get onto that bus so that she could have a free babysitter and go party for a few hours. But it was in that church that I found the grace of God. It was literally the men and women of that church that became spiritual mothers and spiritual fathers to me. And it was in that church that changed my life. And so it was like, you know, the idea of Galatians 2:20, you know, like Christ gave everything for me. Like the very least that I could do in return is now give my life back to him. And that kind of started me on this trajectory of just like, I knew that I felt God's grace since I was 5 years old, but I was still like dysfunctional. I was still a crazy kid and a product of that environment. But I knew that God's hand was on my life. And even if I didn't understand it then, I just always felt different. And when I was about 15 years old, this family came to my church, and they were out of a Church of God background. And they started talking about two things that I'd never heard before. They started talking about missions and baptism in the Holy Spirit. And they came to me and they said, "We are going to pay for you to go on a mission trip. Anywhere you want to go, we're going to pay for it. And you pick." So 15 years old, I didn't know anything. So I signed up to go to Australia for a month, thinking I'm getting like this free vacation. And it was on that trip that I got filled with the Holy Spirit. And I remember God speaking to me clearly saying, "This is what you're going to do the rest of your life." And so I was over there for a month. I came home and no one was at my house. And, you know, growing up in my environment with the alcohol and the addictions and drugs and stuff, it wasn't uncommon. But after about 2 or 3 weeks, the water had been shut off, the power had been shut off, and the phone had been shut off. And my sister came and told me that my mom had actually gotten arrested for drug possession, posted bail, and just fled the state. And no one even told me. So I've been living on my own since then. And I just started bouncing around between friends' houses. But it was during that season that I started seeing all of my friends just kind of fall into that same cycle of addiction and abuse and these different things. And I just, again, I ran back to the church and I just clung to God's church. And when I was 20 years old, I moved to Michigan and started going to a local Assemblies of God church. And I started getting in the process of getting credentialed. And then I went on a trip to Costa Rica with them on a short-term trip. And my wife, we had just gotten engaged at that time. My wife was adamant she was never going to do missions, but I knew I could talk her into it if we just like kept going at it. And she goes on that trip, and she just had this encounter with God where like that just really kind of sealed like our fate. And so we got married in 2009, and in 2010 we signed up to go to Latin America, and we worked in the country of Nicaragua, and we lived in Costa Rica at the language school. So we learned Spanish. We spent 3 years down there working with Compassion Ministries, and we were working with an organization that was feeding about 8,000 children every single day. These were most of
Were
these
you
kids.
with King's Castle?
No, I was in Nicaragua doing Engage, which is like
Okay.
study abroad, but then Feed the Hungry was a part of that.
Okay.
But it was there that, you know, and like we loved it. Like our best friends are still the pastors that we have in Costa Rica. Like I'm actually there. They came to visit us right before COVID, and we were down there in January, and we loved Latin America. We were never going to leave. And one day I made a mistake of picking up a book called Apostolic Function, written by a guy named Alan Johnson, who's a worker in Thailand. And in this book, he starts talking about statistics of where workers are. And it said for every 1 million believers inside of a country, there's 189 like missionaries, workers in that country. But for every 1 million Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu, there's less than 4 workers in those countries. And when I read that statistic, my heart started to break, because I knew that like God was starting to like transition us to Asia, and we loved Latin America, but it's not that we don't think workers are still valuable there. We just want to kind of even out those numbers a little bit.
Here's Latin America can get in your blood, can it?
It's something. It really is. Like it's still one of my favorite places in the world.
That's our background, but it just kind of it gets in your blood, and
yeah. But yeah, so
very special about it.
in 2004, we moved to Asia, having never been there before. And I was so excited because, you know, Thailand, and we moved to Thailand and for the first 7 years, for the last 7 years, we've been living in Thailand. And Thailand and Southeast Asia, it's a predominantly Buddhist country with many unreached people. I still meet people on a daily and weekly basis that have never heard anything of Jesus. And you have to like kind of formulate the gospel to people that have literally no foundation. But I was so excited to go there. I'd never been to Asia before, and we landed at 1 a.m. At night, and I woke my wife up at 6 a.m. the next morning, and because I had like TripAdvisor and Google searched like the top 10 tourist places to go to, and it was all these like old temples and stuff. And so I woke my wife up at 6 a.m. We jumped on a water taxi, and we just went straight downtown, having never been here before. And I walked into my first temple, and I saw people bowing down, literally worshiping at the altar of a concrete statue that they literally could have made with their own hands. And I just put my camera down, and I just started to cry. And I just saw the oppression that was over those people. And it was in that season that God really sparked a heart for us for the Buddhist world. And so we started to travel to different countries in Southeast Asia. We really focused on church planning and campus ministry. And yeah, so that's kind of the journey so far. I don't know if you...
Peirce, can I, this isn't a normal part of our question pattern for our weekly calls, but you said something, and as part of your story, I just feel like I should ask it. When you came from that broken background, you went to Australia, and then you came back. You know, you had that background in the Baptist church, which was really pivotal in bringing you to the Lord. And then at 20, probably, you know, with the little experience you had in Christ, you started at that Assemblies.
Yeah.
What can you just kind of like take 1 minute? What about that building, that house, that Assemblies really stood out and like built you up?
I think it was 2 things. I think first, it's a really community oriented church. Like this local congregation, like they're really, really close. And I love that aspect of it. But honestly, it was growing up Baptist. I went back and spoke at my home church about 4 years ago, and the senior pastor is still the same pastor that I had with a kid. And when he introduces me as, we're so excited to have Peirce here. I can honestly tell you that he's one of 4 missionaries that I've ever even met in my entire life. And he's a pastor who was 72 years old at the time, and he had only ever met 4 missionaries at that time. That was the difference in the AG. As soon as you walked into an AG church, you knew that missions was at the forefront of what they were about. And I think it was like, you know, that calling on my life just tied into the identity of the AG and how we really do believe that, you know, sending out workers to drive the gospel so that the church can be planted is at the core of our DNA.
So
And
one
for
more
me,
question following oh, I'm sorry, Peirce.
no. So yeah, I was going to say, for me, that's really what tied me to an AG church.
So one more question about the church, maybe under a minute, and then we'll continue with our normal pattern. What was it about missions in that church that, I mean, how did you know that that was a value for?
They had missionaries in, they went on short-term trips. You know, I was a youth leader at the time, so they were pushing Speed the Light. Like, we had never given to like missions growing up, like in my home church. Like, we'd never had a missionary come in. Like, I went on a trip with Teen Mania Ministries, which was an organization based out of Dallas, Texas, or Dallas Fort Worth, Texas area. But like, that was unheard of in my community, were those trips. So
Great. Okay, so turning onward, and again, for those of you that joined late, this is Peirce. Due to sensitivity, we're not going to say where Peirce is a worker at, but I have asked him prematurely before this call, you know, what can we share and what can't we share? Because I think the nitty gritty of our details is share with us some experiences that you have there, and I wanted to be sensitive. So the visa process, the people, I mean,
yeah.
talk about the people without the nation being mentioned, and some of your
Yeah.
favorite experiences, because that's the part for us that
So
I'm sorry.
okay, so when we first moved to Asia, we moved to Thailand, and Thailand's a pretty open country as far as you can openly preach the gospel without fear of persecution or getting kicked out or anything like that. And when we were there, we were still young to ministry. We were still trying to figure out what our long-term path was going to be. But we lived next to the 10th largest university in the world. It has about 550,000 students on one campus. So we just started going down there, and we just started doing English clubs. And then we started, like, you know, doing a Bible study after and stuff. And we started seeing students that would come and they would stay connected to the Bible study, and they'd start coming to our house. And there was one young girl named Da, who she came the very first week that we did our English clubs. And over the last 4 years, we've been discipling her. And she just planted a church in Bangkok, Thailand, the March of this year, reaching the same university students that we were reaching. So we, like, even in the midst of like all this spiritual darkness, we started to see just like moments and just like glimpses of God's goodness and God's light. And so we started doing school outreaches. We started doing university ministry. And I was at a school about 2 years ago in Thailand, and all of our schools are attached to a Buddhist monastery. It's the state religion, so it's taught, you have to follow it in the school. And there was a young girl, as we were doing this school outreach, that she actually got saved, and she's 12 years old. And she started coming to our local Thai church, and we were discipling her, and she was just growing strong in her faith. And one day she went back to school after about 3 or 4 months of being a believer. And her teacher goes, okay, it's time to worship Buddha. Everybody clear your desks. Now we're going to have to do the time of meditation and worship. And May, 12 years old, she slips up her hand and she goes, teacher, I'm so sorry, but I can't worship Buddha anymore. I'm a Christian. And the teacher was actually really offended. She was upset because there's a lot of social pressure for Thai people not to leave Buddhism. And so she tells May, she goes, May, I want you to come up to the front of the class, and I want you to tell all of your classmates, all the students, why you're too good to worship Buddha. And so little May gets up out of her desk. She walks to the front of the classroom, and she looks at her teacher, and she's like, teacher, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to offend you, but I can't worship Buddha anymore because Jesus Christ lives in my heart. He changed me. He gave me hope, and he filled my life with peace. And she starts preaching to the class to the point where the teacher sat down in her desk and just began to listen to her. And then May turns her attention to the students, and she just talks about her testimony and all that God had done in her life. And she ends it like this. She goes, okay, how many of you want to receive Christ? You raise your hand right now, because I'm going to pray for you and you're going to receive Christ. And May said about 12 of those students raised their hand that day. She did a prayer of salvation over them. But the cool part is, I was sitting in church the following Sunday. I see May open the door to the church, and 8 of those classmates are right behind her. And they're still in our church, and they're still getting plugged in and discipled. And we just started seeing God do incredible things. And we started to recruit more workers out to Thailand, and our field just started to grow exponentially. And we had a lot of workers for that part of the world. Our churches were growing a lot stronger. It's still a small country with less than 1% Christian, but the church there is starting to thrive, and it's starting to grow. So we were doing that. We were doing a lot of training and development. And then in 2016, I got invited to go to a specific country in the Himalayan mountains. And this is a country that has remained completely isolated from the Western world. Just to give you some perspective, they just got TV in the country for the first time 3 years ago, and they only get about 4 or 5 channels from India. There's no stoplight in the country. There's no building over 3 floors. It's a country that when I visit, they charge me $250 a day just for my visa to be in the country. And you have to have a government agent, a government certified tour guide with you 24/7. You're not even allowed to roam around the country on your own. And so we started to go to this country, and all of our workers had been kicked out. And then we found out there's not even a church in their own local language. And when I saw that, again, it was like that numbers thing. There's no one here. There's no one here preaching the gospel. There's not a church in their own local language. And so over the last 2 years, we just began to pray, and we just began to ask God, like, put a vision in our heart to reach these people. And so we ended up starting a tour guide, a travel agency, because we started taking trips into the country. We're bringing pastors and other potential workers to maybe come out here and join a church planting team. And through this experience, I got introduced with 4 men that from this nation in the Himalayas that had won an all expenses paid trip to Bangkok, Thailand. And I don't know how it came about, but for some reason they used my tour company of all the companies they could have used. And so I'm in Bangkok, Thailand, showing these 4 men around for 4 or 5 days. And I'm very honest about my religion. I don't always say the title of my career, but I'm very honest that, hey, I'm a believer from day one. Like, I don't like to do a bait and switch 6 months or a year into the relationship. But I was telling them about all the school assemblies that we were doing, talking about purpose, morals, and values and stuff in Thailand. And at the end of the trip, one of the guys, the leader of the trip, he confesses that he is the second in command for the Ministry of Education in this entire nation in the Himalayan mountains. And he has now invited me back to go to this country anytime I want. And he's going to drop my $250 visa fee. And I get to speak in all of his public schools on purpose, morals, and values. And obviously, I believe all of those things are tied to my identity in Christ. But I have to be a little bit more, like incognito in how I communicate that. But God just started to open up these doors for us. And in October of last year, my family and I just really began to pray about what is God doing? Is God going to move our family to this nation? And so my family went there for the entire month of October. It cost us about $25,000 to go to this country for 1 month. But we paid it because we really believe that God's church must be planted, because I'm a product of God's church. I was saved because of God's church. And the reason I am where I am today is because of God's church. And I believe that the church must be planted in nations in the Himalayan mountains. And so we were there for 1 month, and we literally had no plan. We didn't know what we were doing. We had the tour guide with us 24/7. So we just began to pray. And every day as a family, I've got these 2 little boys, 4 and 5, and my wife and I, we would just hold hands before we went out the door of our apartment there. And we were just like, God, we have no idea what to do, but we trust you and we know that you're in control. And over the next 4 weeks, all these doors just began to open, where I was meeting with the ministry of NGOs, non-government organizations, on how to put a nonprofit in the country. I was meeting with educators on how to get teachers in the country. And I met with the Ministry of Foreign Investments on how to put a visa platform in the country. And God just gave us so much favor, because he verbally approved us to build a visa platform in the country that we think will at least get us 4 to 6 families that will all be working in this country to put the very first church planting team that will, in hopes, put the first church planted in their language in this nation.
Hey, Peirce.
Yeah.
2-part question before we turn it over to the group. And the first is, are they at all English speakers in this nation?
Yeah, so this is the really cool part that so this is a tiny nation that's landlocked between China and India. So at any moment, they are living in fear that one of these 2 nations is just going to take them over. But because they're landlocked, the universal business language of business between these countries is English. So in 2006, they switched to all of their public schools as teaching English only. So everyone that's about 21, 22 or younger is fluent in English. Everyone that's about 23, 24 or older, they're not as fluent, and they only speak the ethnic language.
Now, I asked that because I didn't want to ask what the primary language is there. That might give the nation away. but that helps us kind of understand how do you work amongst communication, because communication, there's really no communicating the gospel unless you can communicate with the people. So that,
Right. And for us, like anyone who comes, because like we found in Thailand, like, excuse me, if you can speak the language of the people, like you know this from your time in language school, like if you make the effort to learn their language, you learn the heart of the people. Like I always tell people, you can learn about the culture by doing two things: try to learn their language and fall in love with their food. If you don't do those two things, like you're going to be successful no matter where you land. So for us, any of us on our church planning team, even though the nation is learning English, we're still going to make an attempt to learn the language, the local language of the people.
hey, so Peirce, we had one come in late. Hey, Matt, will you just kind of say, hey, I wanted to make sure we were able to introduce you
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
because you got in late. Matt's been coming to our church for a few weeks, lives in town here with the rest of us in Carthage. As well as his wife Lizzie in the background. Hey, Lizzie.
Hi.
And this is Peirce. Again, Peirce serves in a sensitive country outside China in the Himalayas. And I'm sure you guys heard it, but a few things that stood out to me, Peirce. Number one, a visa that costs $250 a day just to be a worker there. Over 2 stories, no stoplight, a tour guide that has to remain with you 24/7, as well as probably the most important part, no church. I mean, that should, no church in their, in their, maybe their heart language or whatever, but, that should be a wake-up call for us sometimes, and it should stir us to say, boy, there's something we can do, whatever that might be, whether it's just holding the rope for you or, for us, we think there's got to be something more than just holding the rope. But those things certainly stood out. Is there any other kind of key memory you want to share before I turn you over to the group for comments and questions?
No, I think we could do Q&A if you want.
Okay. I just feel like this is the vital time. It's kind of the backbone of our call.
Yeah.
So that everyone is not just a listener, but also engaged. And we want you to know our folks because, if you really hit it off here and maybe they connect with you on Facebook or email, there's the opportunity to have that strong relationship. So when you do, or should the Lord lead it, you are able to come in. They kind of already know you.
Yeah.
So questions, comments from anyone at in any order. Okay. No one? Sometimes I start because I think the group's forming a question. So, were you required, even though in English now, but were you required on this side to go to language school in the nations beforehand?
Yeah. So we did 8 months in Costa Rica to learn Spanish. And then when we got to Thailand, my first year, I did full-time 5 days a week because I had to do the government language exam for the visa. So.
Okay, here's kind of a funny, choose one phrase, and then as fast as you can say it, I want you to say it in Spanish, and then English, and then Thai. All back to back with very little gap.
Oh, I don't know. I can say, hola, ¿cómo estás? Sabaydi mai kap. Hey, how's it going? That's like challenging. I haven't spoke Spanish in a long time.
Yeah. So, yeah, how about anybody else?
I guess the question I have is where you're at. Do you have, so to speak, enough boots on the ground to do what your vision is and what you plan on doing?
No, but I would argue that I think Jesus had the same problem in Matthew when he said the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. No, like we really are trying to build up a team, not just of Americans, but of Latinos and actually local people in Asian countries that would kind of band together to plant churches in these communities, that we raise up a local believer to lead that local congregation. So we're always doing recruiting. That's kind of part of the reason we were home this year, was that we were going to be doing a lot of recruiting for a big conference that was scheduled at the end of the year. But no, we're always trying to get more people to come overseas.
Now, Peirce, where you are, what kind of things are you able to do to actually reach out to people?
So in Thailand, we're very community oriented. So for me, because of the environment I grew up in, I'm not the typical person that's probably going to be in a Bible school Monday through Friday. I'm not the guy that's going to be pastoring a local congregation. I love being around lost people. Like, the heart and the core motto of our team is rub shoulders with lost people. So if we're not always engaged in ministries that are centered around lost people, then that's kind of a core element that we're missing from our team. So we live in community. We have a house church that meets twice a week in our house in Thailand. And so we have different types of things where we're always engaging in the community. So we're doing campus groups on university. We do community development in slum communities in Bangkok, as well as we always partner with a local church doing outreach, because we realize, like, if there's not a local church tied to it, the sustainability isn't as strong. So everything we do, we're always bringing a Thai believer with us, or a Thai pastor, as we engage in ministry with unbelievers.
That's probably, since you brought it up, Peirce, question with me is, we saw that overseas. It was, what's the point of us going to do work if we're not bringing along nationals with us to learn it? Because at any point, if something happened to us and we got pulled away, what if they witnessed of us that they'll carry on? So can you kind of just stress the importance of bringing a national with you?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, I think one, like, as a foreigner, I kind of stand out in a crowd, so I can gain people's interest. But no matter how well I speak Thai, I will never speak Thai like a Thai person. I will never know what it's like to come out of Buddhism, face the family and social pressures that come along with that. I will never understand what it's like to have my family hate me because I chose to follow Jesus, like a Thai person will. So for us, like, when we went into campus ministry, I told you the young woman named Da, who was our first disciple, she is now in charge of all of our campus ministry. And so when we go, we're good at drawing a crowd, we're good at getting a conversation going, but she's the one who's digging in the roots of discipleship now. Because, like I said, I'm here in the States for a year, but she's in Thailand still doing the work. So for us as a cross-cultural worker, if we're not bringing someone along with us to lead after us, then I think we may be missing a very key element to evangelism and to ministry, because Paul always had a Timothy or a Titus that he left behind in these places to keep the ministry going, and then even thriving beyond, I think, what Paul could even do in some cases.
I feel like that speaks to us here. We've said to some of our leadership before that now is the time to really implement. I use it as I say a Joshua a lot, but hey, Katie, my wife Katie's joining us. How you doing, honey? This is Peirce. Peirce works in Asia, in the Himalayan region, amongst predominantly Buddhists, I think. And, but you know what? That's what we say, and I think what you just said really speaks to us, because it's not just an overseas worker thing. It's not just for a pastor or an evangelist, but all of us who are in a particular ministry, just as Joshua was a shadow behind Moses, or the disciples behind Jesus, or Timothy under Paul, is that there is, and I love that you're bringing this up, there is a need to pass the torch on to somebody behind us. So I think we all assume that we're going to carry on our roles for a little while, but even still trying to make ourselves replaceable by pouring and investing into someone else. So I see a few on the call, and they're in various ministries, and girls ministries and men's ministries, and we have some on the call in business ministries where they share the gospel amongst those in business. And it's so important to pass on our training, our abilities, our ministry to someone else who's going to step into that place, take them along with us.
Question I have, Peirce, is do you find that the younger generation is more receptive to what you're trying to do, or the older generation maybe? I mean, they've lived that lifestyle for so long that it'd be kind of hard, I would think, to get towards senior citizens to move in your direction. So it's probably easier to disciple younger people over there, correct?
Yes and no. I think it's easier. They're definitely more open to the gospel, but Asia and Latin America was a little bit like this, but Asia in particular, there's a family structure. So like for our friends, like our Thai friends, they don't get to pick their major in university. They don't get to pick who they marry. The family decides that. The individual thinking of you're an individual and you make your own decisions, it doesn't really exist in an Asian context, because your community and your family in particular make your life decisions. So the problem that we see is when students go to university and they're away from their family, man, they'll have great encounters with God. They'll surrender everything to Christ. But the moment they go back to their family and their family finds out, their family will do everything they can to force them back into Buddhism and the culture that they're in. So if they're not strongly rooted in a local church, then I would say 99% of the time they will fall back into Buddhism. But if they can get plugged into a local church and that church becomes their family to them when their biological family no longer wants anything to do with them, yeah, it's easier. But I don't know. The thing you see in the Gospels is when Lydia got saved, she was the matriarch of the family. So it says they baptized Lydia, and then it said the entire family got baptized too. So even though it may be harder to reach the matriarch or the patriarch, if you can reach them, you know the rest of the family will probably follow. So there's different ways. I don't think there's a right and wrong way. I think honestly we got to be working on all fronts, because you just got to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit in those moments.
Good questions.
Peirce,
Yes, sir.
my name's Kip. How are you? God bless you. I'm glad you could be with us tonight. I have a question slash observation slash, I don't know, whatever. I've heard from other workers within the church, such as yourself, and they find different things among the local people that are bridges that they can use to break the ice, so to speak. You know, like one worker, it was that particular people enjoyed receiving gifts.
Mm-hmm.
So if you came with, you know, with something, or they honor or look favorably upon those, you know, that would no, this is such a beautiful home. This is such a beautiful
He's
place.
saying
It's,
like an
you
honor
know,
shame culture. So where you
Yep.
honor.
Oh, okay, yeah. Do you find that, or what have you found that's
Bridges.
are good icebreakers or bridges for you?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Like Thailand particularly sees a lot of foreign men that live there, but not really for great reasons. So as a white man, it's pretty much assumed that I'm there for not so good reasons. And the assumption is I don't speak any Thai. So I'll just I'll start off with English first, and then they'll start talking about me in Thai 9 times out of 10. And then I'll respond back to them in Thai, and then they realize I understood what they're saying. And they're like, you speak Thai? And then I'll say everything in Thai. I'm like, oh no, I don't speak Thai. Ah, pu pasa Thai mai dai, pum pin farang, pum pin Thai mai dai. And they're like, you do speak Thai. And I'm like, no, I don't speak Thai. And that's the best icebreaker I've seen, because then it shows I'm actually there because I love the country. I'm not there for pleasure or anything else.
Amen.
And on all of whenever I have teams come out, I guarantee them that they will have multiple opportunities to meet a person who will ask them this question: who is Jesus? Who is this Jesus that you're talking about? Because what I've done is I've realized how Thai conversations go. If you start off talking about like, hey, what's your name? Like, what's your favorite Thai food? And you start talking about Thailand in a way that like shows that you love it, you broke the ice, because they're very prideful people of their nation. They're super patriotic of Thailand. So we'll start talking about that, and then we'll go into some deeper issues. And then I'll always ask, so what's the main religion of Thailand? And they'll be like, well, I'm a Buddhist. And I'm like, oh, what do Buddhists believe? And they'll give me everything that they believe about Buddhism. And then I'll look at them and be like, oh, that's so different, because I'm a Christian and we believe that. And I'll sit there for 2 hours and have a conversation. Thai people are very community oriented. So they love conversations. All the topics that we're not allowed to talk about in America, they love talking about there all the time. So those are like really good icebreakers for our team.
Thank you, Peirce.
Hey, Peirce, I've got another question.
Yes, sir.
You brought it up, and I recall having some sense of experience with it in particular places. And we love talking about culture. So you being Caucasian, going to certain places where Caucasian is viewed as you're there for a particular reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume, without getting too deep into it, especially if there's children near or watching this later, they assume you're there for pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay. So without getting too detailed, but we had experienced that to an extent in a region where we were, especially a particular city, because sex trafficking was extremely just pivotal in those areas. If you were a kind of a Western European or American and you were in this particular city, you were already thought to be wealthy, and that you were probably there trafficking girls. And does that and you shared your icebreaker, so that certainly opens up, but does that inhibit you anyway? Does that create obstacles in some locations? Being a certain ethnicity?
Yeah, I don't want to say obstacles per se, but I will say, and this is like really sad, but like we've lost workers because of that, because of those moral issues. Even recently during this last few months, we've lost a couple because you are, as a foreign man, constantly solicited when you go out on the streets, especially in Bangkok and some of these cities. And so you really have to be on guard spiritually. But yeah, Thailand is like the human trafficking capital of Southeast Asia, with minors in particularly, and with men and women. And so actually when we got there, we work with A21, which is an anti-human trafficking awareness organization. And so we did a lot of things with them. We were doing awareness and education in schools. That's one of our platforms. Yeah, it's a big, big problem in Southeast Asia. But again, it's part of the culture. So you really have to break the culture. It's not, human trafficking isn't in terms of what we think about here. Because they're Buddhists, they believe, in the Buddhist worldview. And so the Buddhist worldview teaches you about karma, that if you do good, good's going to happen to you. If you do bad, bad's going to happen to you. So if you come into this life and you're poor and you don't have anything and you have 6 kids and they're starving to death, well, this life's already over. So you can sell your child to a human trafficker because it doesn't even matter. So it's just tied into that Buddhist worldview, and it's really challenging to break that cycle because they literally believe that life is all about suffering, and that the entire point of their existence is to suffer. And if they can do enough good things in their life to detach themselves from suffering, then the end result, their heaven, their nirvana, is to become non-existent with the world. So even the final culmination of a Buddhist life is to be nothing. So there's no hope in Buddhism. Like the things that we see here in the West, like about, oh, it's peace, it's tranquility, it's happiness, that doesn't exist for the normal Buddhist. That's a Western ideology. For the normal Buddhist, it's a life of oppression, and it's a life of hopelessness. So for human trafficking, it's not frowned upon per se in that culture.
Wow, that's amazing.
I mean,
Imagine that.
I mean, aside from the hopelessness, honestly, it sounds a lot like what the church is kind of called to in a lot of ways, as far as persecution goes, just being in the world but not being of the world. It sounds like a people group that's almost prime and ready for this life of doing what you're doing, honestly. It kind of sounds to me. But
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask what kind of, like, what persecution looks like for you guys over there.
Okay, so in Thailand, it's just social pressure. There, like as me as a white person, I'm already a Christian. I am flagged from day one. That's just kind of the
Yeah.
assumption.
Okay.
For Thai people, there's social pressure. We've had many friends that when they tell their family they became a Christian, their family no longer associated with them. They've lost their jobs. They've been excommunicated from their circles. Where we're going in the Himalayas, it's a lot more severe. They will actually put you in prison. They'll torture you. There's been killings. My visa will get revoked the moment I'm caught proselytizing or evangelizing.
Okay.
And when I was there in October, I actually met the first of this country's ethnicity, the pastor that was actually put in prison for preaching the gospel under the current government regime, the new government regime in this nation. And he, in about 2013, I believe, he was caught preaching the gospel, and they threw him in prison. And he got stuck in this one prison cell with like 40 other people. There was 3 beds in there and a little hole in the floor that they had to share. And on day 9, he asked if he could have his Bible back. And for some reason, the prison guards, they gave it to him. And so he's telling me this story. He's showing me the Bible because he began to study the book of Job and the book of Acts over and over and over. And I have pictures of all of his notes. It was just like this really cool thing. And what he didn't realize was that over the next 2 years, he was going to go to trial 19 different times for preaching the gospel in this nation. And on all 19 trials, he was acquitted. He was let go because he argued the same arguments that Job used amongst his friends and the same arguments that Paul used before the Roman Empire. And 19 different times he was let go. And it cost him everything. Like he lost everything that he owned, but he's free and he's preaching the gospel to this day. So it's a really amazing testimony, but there's been many other pastors that are still sitting in a prison, all for just being a believer.
Wow.
You don't even know.
I've got a question. If they are put into prison, do these pastors that are put into prison, do they have families? What happens to the families if they're in prison?
This the pastor that I talked to, he's actually said that was the hardest part, because when he was put in prison, he didn't have any contact with his wife and kids for I think 6 months, he said, but the entire church was afraid and they refused to help his family. His family was pretty much homeless, living on the streets, and it was just a fear. They were seeing what was happening and they were afraid of the persecution, and his family really struggled during that season. So I'd love to tell you a better testimony than that, but the reality is these countries are hard for a reason, and it's because the enemy has a stronghold, and even the strongest of believers, the enemy will do anything he can to distract them and to cause pain and hurt in their lives.
I've got one more question. You said, I know that I always thought they stole children off the streets. So you're telling me that many of these parents sell their children?
Yeah. So it's not the movie Taken, like everybody thinks. I get that all the time when like teenage girls especially come to Thailand. Like they're like, oh, I've seen the movie Taken. I'm getting kidnapped like as soon as I walk out the airport. No, that's not the case. That's actually very few and far between. It's scams of manipulation over months, if not years, or in a lot of cases in Asia, especially, parents will sell their kids, because if the option is I either watch my child starve to death, like what's happening right now in Thailand because of the shutdowns and stuff, or I sell them into slavery and at least buy them a life where they can live. It's, for them, these are real decisions that they have to make. It's either you watch your child starve to death or you believe this guy who's gonna, take your daughter and give her a life.
So Peirce, I want to add just a piece to that from our own. I mentioned that we were in LAC, specifically we were in the Amazon jungles. There are, poverty is a prevalence there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a human trafficking center, not only because of the poverty, because of the girls, but because also of the transportation systems, being able to use the waterways, get these out on a boat and right into the next countries. So they've got ways to cross country borders without having to go through the airport. In response to Mabel's question about, do they outright sell them? Even in our own experience, one other morning, another overseas worker and I were having breakfast. The owner said just the night prior, they found male upstairs with 3 teenagers and lured them in by money, you know, through the family. The family let him have them.
Yeah.
And as he was getting arrested the night prior, he paid off the police and they let him go.
Yeah.
And so our money, for one, in the Western world goes a long way in places like that. But families don't always necessarily know that they're giving up a child to that. The predators are preying on the poverty, so they come into these communities where the mother and a father have got 7, 9 kids, and they see the prettier of the teenage girls and say, you know what, we're glad to pay $10,000. We've got modeling jobs. We've got, she could be a secretary for our country's State Department, and we'll keep constant communication with you. And it all looks very good. Then at a point, you don't know where they are. They fall off the map. And the country that these people are being kind of predatored towards, especially even Peru, somebody comes in with $10,000, which is easy money for us, especially if you're in this kind of ring. $10,000 to a Peruvian would be equivalent to somebody saying to you, maybe I've got 400,000 with your name on it.
Yeah.
10,000 is about 6 to 8 years worth of annual income.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I mean, you feel that pressure to say, well, she'll have a great job. She'll make good money. She can send that money back. And immediately off the bat, we've got 8 years of income to work with. We'll feed our kids, maybe move into a new home. So I think in a lot of places, Peirce, you're right on. I don't think that movie is ever kind of a realistic picture.
Yeah.
It always is lured by something a little more common.
And I would say,
and at a point, you just don't know where they are. They're off.
Yeah. And I would say in our context, what's a little bit different is everything that you said is right on par, except for when the girl goes missing. Actually, very few times does a girl or a boy go missing in Thailand because of the honor shame culture that the gentleman beside you was talking about earlier. The daughter will still have access with her parents even after the first time she's abused or raped or whatever, but she won't ever say anything because of that shame. And not only because she would be labeled that way, but her entire family would now be labeled that way. And she will not leave that lifestyle because of the shame that's associated with it. And she will carry those secrets throughout her entire life and never tell anyone.
Wow.
And she'll still be able to interact with her own family.
I mean, this is going to sound bad, but like most of the victims in that industry, they're not in it for a very long time. There's a stretch where, you know, they're no longer attractive after 5 or 6 years. So they will go back to their families after that or fall into free will prostitution. But it's a challenge. I would think in a lot of situations, they would try to go back to their family. But also at the same time, the family has now become dependent on her income because at least in Thai culture, it's actually the oldest daughter that is responsible for taking care of the parents into retirement because there's no 401k, there's no Social Security. So it's the oldest daughter who now has to take care of her parents, and she has to provide a level of income that can provide for the family. So it's just a cycle of just brokenness, and there's no easy way out for anyone outside of the gospel.
It's so healthy for us to know even what cultural difference is when you leave the borders of our nation and go to another nation, how they've been present for so long that our worldview, an American worldview, doesn't always fit in how we bring the gospel to a whole nother people group.
Yeah.
So, wow. Does anyone have any other questions? No?
Did you go to the refugee camps?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Did you go to the refugee camps in Thailand?
No, most of the refugees are actually in Myanmar. Thailand, they don't have refugee camps, they have prisons when you get caught without a visa or anything. And this is the other thing when we go back to human trafficking. So when a girl is trafficked, they remove all of her identity, all of her paperwork. And Thailand, for some reason, if the moment you were caught without paperwork, even if you're a victim of abuse, And even if they know that you were a victim of prostitution or human trafficking, they throw you into a prison. There's no like restoration. It's you wait in this prison until we figure it out, which will be 6 months to 18 months. So it's a little bit different. And we do go down there and do a lot of ministry. We provide a lot of care packages and stuff with the detention center.
What was you gonna say?
Yes, sir.
At some point in the future, do you see yourself here in upstate New York? Or would it be quite a few years before you would be able to see us in person?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure we could work something out. We're here till January, so maybe, I don't know what your schedule's like later in the fall, but maybe we could work something out.
Matt, our schedule is any Sunday you want to come in, you come in.
All right, because I mean, when Canada opens up, that'll save me like 5 hours off that trip.
Okay,
Otherwise, I'll
right.
go around the lake and come up the other
Love
way.
you too.
But no, I would be honored if you guys want to work something out. Yeah, we would love to come and share a
Matt,
little bit more.
there's not much working out. You just you got my contact information earlier. Matt and I had never met before today. Weren't acquainted. Probably have got some mutual friends, but all you have to do is send us a date and it's on the calendar. It's
Okay. All right, I'll try.
All
right, I'll do
these
it.
These Zoom calls are good access for us to acquaint with you first. So when you come for the first time, we already love you. We already know you, and people already want to take you out to lunch. They want to host you in their home. So
awesome. I love free food.
That's a guy thing.
Anything further, guys?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I was just kind of curious about your kids. How are they with all of that?
You know, like they love it. Like this is actually their longest stretch in America. They went to a Thai school, so they're way more Thai than they are American at this point. Our oldest was actually born there, so they really love it. Our family really misses Asia right now, especially with COVID. I tell everybody jokingly, like, you know, this is our fourth time we fundraised in our 10 years in AGWM. And it's our third one during a presidential election year. I don't really recommend that for other people. It's a little bit more stressful than most. But yeah, we miss Asia, and we really believe, you know, ministry is not a 9 to 5 to us. If like our whole family's not living in community with people, then we think we're doing it wrong. So our kids' best friends are Thai kids. Their kids went to a Thai school, and there's been challenges with that. And one situation in particular was really a struggle. Yeah, I'll just kind of tell you. So we put our kids in this Thai school, and I picked up my son from school one day, and he's 4 years old. And he looks at me and he goes, "Dad," like on the drive home, he's like, "Dad, is God sad when we go to temple?" Talking about a Buddhist temple. And I was like, well, you know, like God doesn't want us to go to temple. And I explained to him the reasons why we go to church. And he looks at me, 4 years old, and he goes, "Well, I think God's sad with me because today we went to temple." And I'm like, "No, you didn't. Like you were in school all day." And he begins to tell this story that I later called the teacher to confirm was true, that for some reason that day, she decided to take my son and only my son out of the entire school, put him in her car and drive him to a nearby temple, force him to go into the inner chambers of the monk and bow down, worship, pay alms. We don't know what happened in there. And obviously as a parent, every unimaginable thought you could have starts running through your brain. And we struggled with that. Like I had all these conversations with my 4-year-old that I'd never thought in a million years I would have to have. And I called the teacher, and for lack of a better word, I encouraged her not to do it again. And we removed them. We removed our kids out of the school that day. Like we couldn't trust them. We put them in another school. But it really shook us. And then a couple days later, we had a friend call us, actually another worker from LAC called us, and they kind of just gave us this prophetic word. And they said, "Just so you know, nothing bad happened to your son, because greater is he that is in your son than he that is in this world." And what they were saying is greater is Jesus inside of us than the enemy in this world. And it just brought so much comfort to our life. And if anything, that only reassured our calling overseas. Like, yeah, is it hard? Is it difficult? Absolutely. Are there going to be challenges? Sure. But God calls all of us as a family. And my motto is, if I go to Thailand and I save all 70 million people, but I lose my 2 kids in the process, I'm the worst missionary that country's ever seen, because my kids are my biggest disciples I'll ever have. And I challenge every parent with that. because we can't lose our kids in the process. So I say all that to say is my kids love Asia. We love Asia. And I taught them that silly little song, like, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Like, it's a silly song, but I believe it, man. Like, the light of God is inside of us, and the light of God is inside my 4 and 5-year-old. And so we love it. Like, I know that's a long answer to your question, but we love it.
No, that's good.
Wow. Peirce, on a lot of levels, you really spoke to us tonight. It's needed, not just for the cultural understanding of how good we got it, for the demand of the mission and the need for the commission, the response to the commission, but just on so many levels of family commitment and persecution elsewhere, and sometimes the challenges we overcome and the language and all that to say thanks.
No, thank you. I appreciate you all taking the time. I love when anybody's heart is drawn towards this line of work. And yeah, I don't know. I truly believe that people like me are not separate from the local church. Like, we are just extensions of every local church because we carry the same DNA. And so thank you all for taking the time tonight to do this.
God bless.
Yes, great.
Peirce, the reality is at the end of a phone call like this, it's sort of like, how do you pray for a guy like this? I mean, you know, we don't have the worldview that you have. We don't have the knowledge of how things work in and out. We just got a glimpse tonight, but it's sort of like, how do you even pray? And just, Lord bless you.
Pray for strength. Like, the biggest thing is, like, you know, we're all obedient to what God's calling each of us to do. Like, I don't believe that one person's better than the other, but we all need to pray for stronger backs to carry the vision and the plans that God has for each of us. So that's the biggest thing. Just pray that all of us have the strength to fulfill, like, that obedience that God's calling each of us to.
Would anyone have it on their heart who was affected maybe in different ways tonight to just, you know, to say close us out, because it's just the beginning of, you know, Lord willing, a greater relationship, but who feels that they have, you know, the prayerful words to cover this family?
I guess I can.
That awkward moment when nobody wants to pray for you.
No, I'll pray for you. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this family, Lord, and we thank you for the hand that you have upon them for this nation, Lord. We just ask that you guide them in each and every walk and each and every person that they come into contact with in this nation, Lord. We ask that you just show your light to these people, Lord, and draw them to Peirce and his family, Heavenly Father, so we can save that nation and beyond. And we just ask that you give him the strength and the wisdom to do all that you have for him to do. And we just thank you for his great testimony, Lord, this evening. And we just thank you for everything that you do and what you're going to continue to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
The best I can do.
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Awesome tonight, Peirce. Hey, we're glad to do this with you again. This isn't a one deal for us. We want it to be an ongoing relationship. And you don't even have to ask me about a date. Tell me the date you're coming. It's
okay.
Carthage, New York. And
try like the middle of January. We'll give him about 4 foot of snow.
I'm sure anyone volunteering to give them snowmobile rides and
snowmobile
rides. Take them ice fishing.
Have one.
Okay. Peirce, we love you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate you guys, and can't wait to be in touch again.
Yeah, see you guys soon. Have a good night.
Take care.
God bless.
Bye.
Bye.